What is yoga? There are many things one could say in response to this question. But to begin with, if we're considering this in the medium of English, then yoga is a four-letter word. And like many four-letter words, hero, icon, diva, love, being some of the other obvious ones, the true reach and depth and the broader, more essential meaning of the word can sometimes be lost because of its casual overuse. The casual overuse sometimes, I would say, cheapens and diminishes the true reach of what yoga and some of those other words really mean. So what does yoga really mean? We could speak about this for hours. Yoga means different things in different contexts. However, in the yoga tradition, the word is very important. Yoga is a Sanskrit word, and Samskrita literally means well done or well made. And when we start to study yoga, we are studying a tradition, we're studying a method, we're studying a school of philosophy that is also part of a broader Indian and Sanskrit tradition. So the words count, and it's very important to consider these words closely and carefully. Samskrita means well done, well made, so nothing is incidental or accidental in terms of the terminology in the yoga tradition. So starting with the word, what does yoga mean if we go right down to the roots of the word? The root of the word yoga as a noun is the verb yuj. Now this word yuj has gone on to give us many words in the English language, such as join and junction. They are derived from the Sanskrit root yuj, which has given us yoga. And they also give us a clue to what yoga means. It means to join. It means to connect. It also means to yoke, Y-O-K-E. Now when I first heard that yoga meant to yoke, I'd never really heard this Y-O-K-E word. It wasn't a familiar part of my vocabulary. I grew up in England. I didn't see bullocks and carts on the streets where I grew up. More recently, I've lived in India several years. I do see oxen yoked to carts. But when I first heard one of my yoga teachers talk about yoga as yoking, I wondered if this was something to do with the yolk of an egg, or it was some culinary term to bind things together using the magnificent culinary properties of the yolk of an egg, or it was something about getting to the heart of things. Now, those are not inaccurate ideas. Yoga does mean to draw things together, to bring them together, to help them come into a whole, a state of cohesion and integration. And yoga is about bringing things into the center, into the heart, we might say. However, Y-O-K-E, yoke, is also a very useful lens or way to consider what yoga really means. So what is this yoking business? What's the difference between yoke and just joining or connecting? So when we see, for example, the cart being drawn by the bullock or the oxen, the yoke is that device that links the oxen to the cart. Now, when we yoke the oxen to the cart, why do we do that? So when I see the farmer riding along on his cart, often he's carrying a lot of stuff. He yokes the oxen to the cart so he can help transport things which were previously separate as a unit to another place. And this is a useful way of considering yoga, to bring things into togetherness so they can move as a cohesive unit or as a whole. Maybe you've experienced in your life a sense at times perhaps of disintegration, dislocation, separation. We might feel, for example, I'm not fully here. My body's here, but my mind is really somewhere else. We usually experience as a human being this sensation of being torn. It's not unknown to us. And yoga is the antidote. It's the remedy. Yoga is a recovery project or a rehabilitation project. Now, as I'm speaking like this, because you are not right there in front of me, it's hard for me to kind of see how all this is landing. But so far we've already encountered several key ideas about what yoga is. We've mentioned the idea of yoking, joining two things which were previously disconnected so that they can now move together as one. Previously they were separate, but now they can move as one. So for example, as we are going through life, sometimes different parts of ourselves get more practice, more exercise, and get more developed than others. For example, some people in their day-to-day life, they use their analytical skills, or let's say their linguistic analytical skills a lot. And such people tend to have a lot of faith in their capacities of linguistic analysis because they're used to them. They use them a lot. Some people, for example, let's say you're a professional dancer, and your favorite hobby is building things. Such a person is probably very confident and at ease in their physical and kinesthetic powers. Somebody else might work in a realm where they've got to really read people's emotional fields all the time. And such a person might be very attuned to and have great confidence in his or her emotional intelligence and sensitivity and capacity to read an emotional field in a room or a group. But often, as a human being, there are some parts of ourselves that are much less developed than others. So we might, for example, have neglected some of our physical capacities. We might have neglected some of our sense capacities. We might have neglected some of our emotional capacities. We might not have given as much opportunity for certain aspects of our intellect or our bodily powers to develop. And so the idea is in yoga that oftentimes as a human being, this vehicle of our physical reality is not really existing in a state of true wholeness or cohesion. And so yoga, in the sense of yoking, means bringing all parts of ourself into a state of greater balance and cohesion. And so this highlights a key point that we'll emphasize, I'm sure, more than once as we continue. Yoga is a state of balance, of wholeness, of evenness, of integration, of togetherness, of being gathered. It's a state of attunement or at-one-ment. You might even say it's a state of all-oneness. Not loneliness, but all-oneness, aloneness, in the sense that nothing is left out. All has been made part of this cohesive whole. So yoga is a state, this state of balanced integration. And at the same time, yoga is also a process. Yoga is a way. Yoga is a method. It is the practical school of Indian philosophy. The practical school. And this means that to study yoga means to practice yoga. And to practice yoga means to study yoga. You cannot practice yoga unless you are paying attention. So what's the difference between yoga and stretching or doing yoga postures? Yoga is all about how we do whatever we are doing. All yoga methods, all yoga techniques, all they are really intended to do is to train ourselves in the ways of at-one-ment. To train ourselves in the ways of doing whatever we are doing with all of ourselves. So for example, when we work with a yoga technique, for example, a meditation technique, we give the powers of our awareness something to orient towards, to gather around, to focus on. Now, when we then use that support to become more gathered, more focused, more clearly oriented, our whole system can experience a greater quality of yoga. If we are doing a physical yoga practice, like an asana practice, say for example you're doing a dynamic flowing asana practice, how does this become a yoga practice? The idea is we use that method to invite all parts of ourself to participate in the present moment. So we have to pay attention and invite our physical powers to support us, to stay balanced as we move through space in all these different forms. We also have to pay attention to the movement of energy through the agency of the breath in our body. And if it's yoga, then we're going to use that breath to foster greater harmony and cohesion through the system. In order to do this, we have to use our sense powers. So as we move through space, we feel ourselves moving through space. We savor and relish the quality, the fragrance, the texture of the breath as it moves in and out of our body. We use our field of vision to help us stay balanced and to practice drishti, having a focal point that is not fixated. It moves, it shifts. We stay aware of the bigger picture around us as we also stay connected to a central focal point. But this central focal point is not a dot, it's a dynamic thing. And so such a practice is a way to train the system in the ways of being centered and balanced, even as we move through different experiences, even as our world turns upside down. And so this is an important thing to realize. Yoga postures are not yoga practice. Yoga postures are preparation for the real practice, which is the rest of the day, which is the rest of life. Yoga postures and yoga posture practice, or yoga posture practice methods, are just intended to help attune us to the ways of integration. It's like an orchestra. An orchestra, if they're going to play a beautiful movement, the first thing they do is they tune the instruments. And once they're all tuned, then they can play the movement. So the idea is yoga techniques, such as meditation, such as asana, such as pranayama, whatever it might be. There's a whole ocean of techniques, that any technique is just intended to kind of calibrate the system so we can move through the arena of day-to-day life, the real arena of practice, in a way that it's going to be more easy for us to actually stay in yoga during the day-to-day. So, we've mentioned so far, yoga is a state and yoga is a process. Yoga is a method, it's a school of philosophy. So, we'll pause there and we'll look at some of these ideas in a little bit more detail in the next video.